I'm honored to have the opportunity to share some fabulous folks with you. We have an enormously talented educator, amateur radio operator, and prolific publisher on the web. And this is Anthony, K8ZT, who I'm going to ask to introduce himself because his accomplishments are simply too many for me to cover. So Anthony's going to run us through what he knows and share with us, and I guarantee you, you're going to come out smarter and better informed than you were before. So Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'd ask you to give us a few minutes about yourself, and then you have the stage, sir.
Thank you very much for the very flattering introduction. I hope I can keep up with that tonight. Tonight's presentation is going to be on FT8 and FT4, but as Don had asked me, I'm going to sort of skip through some of the basics tonight, and we're going to jump in a little bit on the deep end. But I have a full slideshow, and I'm going to put that information in the chat right now. This gives you over 120 slides on FT8 and FT4, but tonight's version is going to be abbreviated because we're going to focus on a couple things. I'm going to focus on doing some demonstrations live. Hopefully the bands will cooperate, and also talk a little bit about operating for contesting and field day with FT8 and FT4. So, as I mentioned earlier, the full slideshow is available at the tiny.cc/FT8FT4. My contact information. This is me operating field day 2019 in Vermont, the last time I was out in the field operating. And I'm operating two radios here. One's on the right. I'm operating my single sideband and CW station. But the one on my left, I'm operating FT8 and FT4. Well, actually just FT8 because there was no FT4 for the 2019 field day. And so I was operating two stations at the same time. FT8 and FT4, my multitasking mode, I do those when I'm doing other things. If I'm writing or working on a web page or even operating contest, or if I'm doing a presentation. So right now I'm on FT8 and FT4. And some of the reasons I got started originally with JT65, then FT8 and FT4 both, was to increase my worked all states band totals on some of the bands, especially 160, and also to use some bands that often seem dead, such as 12 meters and 10 meters. There's quite a bit of activity there on FT8. And all my contacts in my station are QRP for the most part, 5 watts or less. And it's interesting that I can actually call CQ and get power-ups with my 5 watts, something I'm not used to doing. I was originally trying to get my 50th state on 160, North Dakota, and I ended up getting it before I got it on JT65 with the CW contact. But FT8 has been very good for increasing my numbers on 160. I just have a small sloper, and running 5 watts 160 can be a little bit challenging at times. My best DX on 160 with FT8 has been a ZS in South Africa, about 13,000 miles from here, Siberia about 8,500, and then an E51 in North Cook Island. When I originally glanced at the screen, I thought it was an ES1 in Estonia, which would have been very good on 160 anyway, but then I realized my eyes were deceiving me. It was actually an E51 in North Cook Island. In just 3 years during the sunspot low, my DXCC total with FT8 and FT4 is 219, and I got DXCC on 3 bands, 10 bands worked all states, about 19,000 QSOs, and as I mentioned earlier, everything is 5 watts or less. Here's my worked all states. I'm still looking for Alaska on 6 and Hawaii on 6 to finish up my 550 contact worked all states, all bands. If some of you have antenna restrictions, FT8 is a weak signal mode, and you can make contact with antennas that you don't normally have a lot of success with on single sideband, and so balcony antennas and things of that nature. Mag-mount antennas, magnetic loop antennas work pretty well, but the problem when you're using them on single sideband or CW is every time you QSY and move your frequency a little bit, you got to tweak it again. Well, with FT8 and FT4, once you get to the band you want to operate in and get everything tuned in, you don't touch the dial again, so they're a great combination for FT8 and FT4. This is the breakdown of my operating, and you can see it's changed over the years. Back here, I was a novice and only had CW privileges, and then Tex got phone privileges, and I spent a lot of time on 10 meters. And then in 2020, I got my extra class license and start working a lot more CW. As you can see, the blue portion down here, and everything just sort of went along, and more CW, less and less phone, a little more RTTY. And then something happened in 2016. I went to a Hamfest in Toledo, and a gentleman talked about JT65. I came home, tried it out, and it ended up being a lot of my operating in 2016 and 2017. But something else happened in 2017. FT8 came out, and I sort of jumped on the FT8 boat. FT4 came out in 2019, and so forth. So you can see there's been a change in my operating over time. A couple of myths about FT8, FT4. FT8 requires the internet to make QSOs. It does not. The internet is mainly used to synchronize the time on your computer. That's the only thing you really need the internet for. But it could also be helpful for working with the helper apps, which I'll talk about a little bit later. JT Alert. But there is no internet required. Another myth is there's no operator required, and there is an operator to be required, and I'll show you a tragic situation where there wasn't an operator there. No skills are required. Well, you can make contacts with no skills, but if you want to make the contacts you want and work all the states you want in all the countries, it does require a little bit of skill. And only new radios can be used. Any radio that can do single sideband can be used. So here's an example of there was no operator there. PSK Reporter actually is an aggregator that people's signals, they set up their decoding system so that it sends over the internet information about who they're hearing. So all the information gets fed into this aggregator page, PSK Reporter, which I'll show a little bit more of later. But for over 20 minutes, one evening back in March of 2019, I was being heard on 160 in Antarctica at minus 6 dB for over 20 minutes, and I kept calling, but no one answered because there wasn't anyone there. The station was on, but there was no operator to respond to me. So in that case, that's the one that got away. As far as setting up for FT8 and FT4, I'm not going to go into step-by-step tonight, but you need an HF radio capable of single sideband, and it also works on VHF too. So with the ARRL VHF UHF contest coming up here in a couple of weeks, there'll be a lot of FT8 activity on 6 meters, 2 meters, and maybe even some on 440 depending on your area. You need a computer, but the computer can be almost anything. Windows 7 or later, Linux, Raspberry Pi, Macintosh. You need a sound card or a sound card interface either in your radio, external, or in your computer, and you need some software. Some radios have built-in sound cards. The radios in green all have built-in sound cards, so you just need to hook up the USB cable between the radio and your computer, and you're all set to go. Some radios do not have sound cards that have been around fairly recently, and a couple of these are still in manufacture, I think. For example, the 891. But they do not have sound cards built into them, so you would need an external sound card interface. Some radios do not have sound cards built in, but they can be connected directly to your sound card. They don't need any kind of other interfacing. Here's two kits that are out there, and the QRP guys just announced a replacement kit for this. They've dropped the double single sideband and moved to a single sideband type of model, and they have band modules that plug in for different bands. The phasers from Midnight Design Solutions are single band radios, 5 watts. Or you can use an old radio. Here's a early 1970s vintage Argonaut 509 with a slack tuning dial. As you can see, it's leaning to one side there. I hooked it up with a external interface, the MFJ 1204, and was on FT8 in just a few minutes making contacts. The software that I'm using is WSJT-X. It's the original software for these modes, and there's other modes in there also. There's also helper software, JT Alert or Alarm JT for Linux and Macintosh. And there's the online monitoring spotting PSK Reporter, but you don't need to download that. It's just a web service. And then you also need to have some way to synchronize your time, and most people will need to install a special program if you're running a Windows machine, because the Windows time syncer is not sufficient. You also need a method to generate audio, either the sound card in the radio, a sound card interface, or an independent sound card, and then a way to key the radio's push to talk, usually cat control, but you can also do it with the sound card interfaces, which have built-in keying, or you can use the radio's Vox. These are all links in my slideshows. Most of the images, the little buttons, are links. You can tell when I move a mouse over them. These are some of the radios that I've set up in the past, so I have the links available on my website and on this presentation. Here's some examples of some external sound card interfaces: the Signal Link, the Mini Pro SC, and the MFJ1204. I just got, and I don't know how it's going to be, but I'm going to show you this anyway. Let me see if I can remember what it's called. It's called the DigiRig Mobile. It's very small. I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but I'll put it up against the screen here. It's about the size, it's about as big as my thumb, basically. And this is what it looks like. And it's only $39 with the case. And it's basically, you hook up the USB cable, and then you have to connect it to your radio with radio cables that you can buy, or you can make up your own connection. So there's another one I didn't even get a chance to put it in my presentation. This just arrived in the mail yesterday. If you don't need an interface, if your radio just needs a sound card, even one of these cheapy little USB cable, USB sound cards will work. What I suggest you don't do is use the sound card built into your computer. There's just too much possibility of messing up between the signals you want to get in the radio from the software and error messages and other noises in YouTube and things you might play with your internal sound card. I mentioned you need time synchronization software if you're running Windows, and there's some settings you need to do in the software, and I'm not going to run through all those tonight. Just a couple quick operating tips. Before you start the WSJT-X software, make sure you always have all your cables connected and your radio turned on before you start it up, or the software will look around and probably find the wrong interfaces. Most radios, this is a continuous duty mode, so most radios cannot be ran at full power. Whatever you'd be comfortable running your radio with, RTTY or FM is typically what the type of power you should be using. This is a rather long slide, but this is a checklist I put together for a couple of friends I've helped set up over the years. Basically, these are all the things to check before you call Anthony on the phone for troubleshooting. So, computer sound card settings can change on Windows, especially when Windows does updates. Time synchronization software may stop running, or you may not have installed it in the first place. Some radios have a habit of switching bandwidth, and you want the bandwidth filter to be set at its maximum. The radio needs to be in the correct mode. Depending on the particular radio you're using, it might be in USB, upper single sideband, or in data mode if there's a data mode on the radio. And this is one of this is the difference between this and other data modes. Data modes such as RTTY, PSK, they all use lower sideband, but this particular mode uses upper sideband. And then you need to make sure you're actually in the mode you expected you're in, FT8, FT4, not one of the other modes that are in WSJT-X. And then is the special operating activity button selected. And then last, is the radio working on other modes? And we'll go through some of these specifically. This is a screenshot of version 2.2.0. It's actually version 2.4 just came out this week, so that's what I'm running now. But this screen looks pretty much the same. There's two main windows, a band activity window and a receive frequency window. The band activity window shows all the stations that are being decoded, and the other window shows the stations that you're attempting to contact or that you've in your selected window, which I'll show you a little bit more later. So we'll go through these step by step on the actual display, and I'll actually go through all these settings with the actual computer, so we'll do that. Just real quick on this, because it's easier to show statically. This is the band decode window, and you're going to see, if you have it turned on, as you can set it up that way, you'll get a gray line divider between each segment of decodes. Each decode may have one or two stations listed on each line. If there's two stations, the one on the right is the one that you're actually decoding. You're seeing what they're saying to the other station. So in this case, I'm receiving the DL8. I'm not receiving the JE1. If it's in gray, that means it's a station I've worked before. In this case, this orange means it's a new zone. If it's in green, they're calling CQ. So you can see the stations calling CQ. Of course, there's only one station listed there, and they're grid square. So, for example, I can't double-click on the F5 and work in because that's not who I'm actually decoding. I'm actually decoding the UA3XHZ, sending 73 to the F5. On the receive window, if your call sign comes in, it'll be highlighted in red. So anyone that's sending anything to your call sign shows up in red. Now, there is a couple special modes, and if you're going to operate field day, for example, this is one of the areas that you need to realize. You need to set up some special things. There's also a special mode called Fox and Hound, and I just wrote an extensive article on that for the DX engineering blog called On All Bands. But you need to set up these special settings if you're going to operate in one of these special operating modes or contests. If you plan on operating FT8, FT4, with WSJT-X for field day, there's two logging options. You can just set it up so that it uses your logging software such as N1MM along with WSJT-X to integrate the two, or you can operate with WSJT-X just as normal as you would and let it log itself, and then after you're done, dump your log file into contesting software such as N1MM or other program that can create a Cabrillo file. So again, the decision is up to you. There are some advantages and disadvantages, and I'll show you what those are in a few moments. So the pros and cons, if you want to integrate the two, that means you can alternate easily between FT8 and other modes with your logging software. You get a real-time display of the number of contacts you made, and you also see all the contacts you made on all the different modes displayed on the same logging screen. Some of the cons are setup is a little more involved. And you cannot run helper software such as JT Alert if you're integrating it with N1MM for the contest. If you operate the WSJT-X only by itself and then import the information later into your logging software, it's a little bit easier setup. There's less chance of conflicts with other software, and you can run JT Alert or Alarm JT, whichever you prefer. But you cannot alternate easily between other modes with your logging software. And it requires importing the software the log into other software to create your Cabrillo file. But no matter which of the two you choose, if for field day, you have to make sure you change your WSJT-X setting for special operating activity. And I put together a whole multi-page guide on this for local club members. And the first part is just what's on the slides, but after that it shows you how to actually go through what fields you need to change, and I'll actually run through this in person, and it has information on setting up your software, and then it just has some of the basics of operating the software. So again, it's a guide to operating FT8, FT4 for field day. I mentioned a little bit earlier about PSK Reporter, and PSK Reporter, I'll actually demonstrate it live here. This is the interface here. So let's just go step by step through a couple things real quick. So the first thing you need to do is choose the mode you want to operate, whether it's FT8 or FT4. I'm going to stay on FT8 for right now. Then you need to choose which of the bands you want by using the little drop down. So we'll pick 20 meters, and we'll enable, we'll let it decode here. And actually, I think 20 is dead. We've had, it's not too bad now. We were having some solar activity that sort of wiped things out a little earlier. Let me drop down to 40 here. Change my antenna over. Oh, there we go. That's a little better. So we're going to decode stations in this window on the left. I suggest you, we're also in the special Fox and Hound mode, which I don't want to be in. Let's get out of that real quick. I got a little bit ahead of myself there. Okay, so now we're out of the Fox and Hound mode, and we're just in the regular mode. So we'll see the stations we decode on the left side here. This screen up here is the PSK Reporter. I'll make these a little bit bigger. I can zoom those a little bit. It'll make it a little easier to see the stations. So these are the stations that we're seeing on PSK Reporter. This is also PSK Reporter on the bottom of the screen here. And then this is the waterfall. Now, the first thing I need to do before I transmit is I need to find a clear spot on the waterfall where no one else is at. Then hold my shift key down and click with my right mouse button, and you'll see that little red hump there. That basically says that's where I'm going to be transmitting. So I found a clear spot that's not that clear. I'm going to find a clearer spot that looks a little better. Now I can basically double click on any of these call signs here or anyone up here calling CQ, and that would start me transmitting to them. So we'll wait through the next cycle here. Okay, so we'll double click on this Scottish station, even though he's not very strong. Down here in the bottom right, you'll see that there's a timer. Because we're in FT8, it takes approximately 15 seconds per cycle. So I'm transmitting right now. You can't tell that from my you can't see my radio transmitting. I could turn up the volume here for a second so you can hear it. I'm receiving now. And the station didn't reply. Now I'm transmitting again. He called CQ again. No one answered him.
Anthony, is he using the internet to identify his transmission?
No, he's not. These are all the receiving. This is everything I'm receiving. The reason why I have his name and information down here is this helper software, the JT Alert, uses the internet to look that up. So he's transmitting his call, and his grid square here is what he's transmitting. And then I'm pulling this information in off the internet. And I'm going to halt that because we're probably not going to get him at minus 15, but I'll go one more cycle. We'll finish this cycle up and see whether he responds to me. And then I'll find someone that's a little bit stronger. Okay, so there's a station. These are all the stations I'm decoding here. So again, these are all the stations we're seeing. I'm going to double click on this one right here, this VA2. He's calling CQ. His signal strength here is 14. These columns, the first column is the time. The second column is the dBs. In other words, the signal strength. The higher the number, the stronger the signal. The next column is difference in time between my time and their time. So this person's clock is probably off a little bit, this EB1AGG, because everyone else, you want to try and be less than a half a second. Okay, so he just responded to me now, so you see it in red, and now you see it over here in this other window also. Because I had the button that says auto sequence checked, it immediately sent him my second response, which is to send him an R plus 10. In other words, Roger, I copied your -2 and you're plus 10 here. So he just sent me a Roger 73. I sent him a 73. Up pops a screen that tells me to log him. I click OK, and then I click OK again. The second OK is because it's sending it to my logging software. So it automatically puts it into my main log in addition to my station, and my main station log in addition to the log that WSJT-X keeps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to another clear spot down here I ended up with a spot where people are transmitting on top of me. I'm going to call CQ. So I'm going to just click on the CQ button down here, enable transmit, and then I have chosen even, so it's in the even section right now. That's at 00 and then at 30 seconds. So I'm transmitting right now. Okay, finish transmitting. I'll now receive for 15 seconds. Okay, so I just finished transmitting, and now we'll wait to see whether anyone answers my CQ. So no one answered, so I'm calling CQ again. Now, one of the things is if no one answers you, you got to go back and check because you're only seeing the time frame that you're not transmitting. So someone could be transmitting at the same time as you on the same frequency as you. And the whole idea is you want to use an empty spot. You don't want to call where the other stations are at. You always want to be calling on an empty spot between the bottom of the waterfall and the top. Now, some people's radios, so this person just answered me, KN4ZMA. And he's in Virginia. I'm guessing that might be one of you.
Yeehaw, it's one of our favorite troublemakers.
Is Sean in this meeting?
Hello.
I see him. So Sean was +5 here. We'll see what Sean sends me back in a moment. Sean sent me a +3. Actually, he's +8 now. Popped up the log. I sent 73 to him. He'll send me a 73. And we'll be done with our conversation. Now, FT4 works pretty much exactly the same, but you can't do both of them at the same time. So I'm going to go up and change modes here after I'm done getting Sean's reply. And there's the last 73 from Sean. I'm going to go up and change the FT4. Now you notice that the band will the frequency will change because FT8 and FT4 each have a different band segment. So it's changed from 7.040 to 7.0475. And we're seeing we have different people we're decoding now, and actually there's a lot less in this case, but it's twice as fast. So instead of 15 seconds, we have 7 seconds approximately.
Does this start a separate log, or do you log it all together?
It all logs together, and that's how I can tell that I've worked stations before. And if you notice down here with this helper software, the JT Alert, it shows me each of the bands with FT8 and FT4, and then it shows me each of the different possibilities, whether I've worked that call sign before specifically, whether I've worked that country before, or whether I've worked a state before. And I don't see a lot of activity on FT4 here, so we're going to change back to FT8, and let's go ahead and change over to 80 meters. Need to switch the antenna there. Now, what happens is whenever I switch bands like this, I need to make sure I find a clear spot again, but I have to wait at 1 or 2 cycles to make sure I see all the activity on the band. Not much activity on 80, it appears. Everyone must be getting ready to work the CQ worldwide. I'm sorry, CQWPX. So there's only one station I'm hearing right now, and this is K9, I think. Okay, there's a K4, and I'm guessing that might be one of the club members again. Michael?
Yep.
Plus 18. How much power you run there, Michael?
50 watts.
What kind of antenna?
Off-center fed dipole, 80 meter.
Doing a great job. Okay, and I'm going to show you one last thing here real quick. And that's if you want to change the settings, you go up to Settings, Advanced, you choose the box here that says Special Settings, and then pick what you want. So for Fox and Hound mode, you would choose Hound, but for Field Day coming up, you choose the one that says Field Day, and then you need to make sure that you have your exchange, both the number and the letter, and the state with a space between the two. Don't get confused with this bottom one here where it has a state in it or a section name. That's completely different. That's the, let me close that so I can see okay here. That is for the RTTY contest. So if you are working Field Day again, you select Special Mode, ARRL Field Day, and then make sure your exchange is right there. I'll be 2 Bravo. We're heading over to the West Virginia Panhandle. So that's it. Other questions before I run?
I have a real quick one.
Yes.
Your display for the call signs on JT Alert is quite different than what I...
Yes, this is version 2.5. It came out about 3 weeks ago. Or maybe a month and a half ago at the most. If you haven't found it yet, one of the nice things is it used to stack up down here, so you lost vertical space.
Yes.
The new one is a detachable window that you can move anywhere, and you can zoom in very nicely to whatever size you want it to be. Plus, the windows have more information in them. They now tell you, like, that this person's setting 73, and if it's a directional call, like if they're calling CQ Asia, it'll say AS up here, or if they're calling CQ DX, it'll say DX up here. When it's a directional call, it'll also have a purple background around it, so you'll be able to tell at a glance that that person's calling only for specific stations. Now, that requires that you be running, I think it's version 5 of .NET, and it has that software on the website to install it. And you need to make sure you grab the right one. There's two JT alerts, a 64-bit and the standard version. So you need to make sure you're running the right one for your computer. And if you tried it earlier when it first came out, and you did not have a 64-bit computer, it didn't work right. So they had a fix on that, and now it works on all the Windows computers once you install the .NET software.
Anthony, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. And just remember, you can visit any of my presentations at tiny.cc/KZT. A lot of them have been recorded, and you can watch the recordings or go through the slideshows.
Anthony? Thank you very, very much. As usual, you've raced us through at breakneck speed, covered a ton of material, and for all the FT8 lovers out there and users, I know you've helped expand our mind and given us a few skill sets and made us scratch our heads a bit.